Flying into the dead zone, we all had our trepidations about it since none of our previous ships had returned. However, the previous ships only went single and did not have the sensor arrays that we had now. As we pierced the outer edge of the dead zone, we realized that the dead zone itself was almost like a barrier, a shield, as you were. As once we got through, our sensors could pick up several planets in the distance, one of which was actually inhabited. This shocked us, but was not a total surprise, as we knew the dead zone itself was inhabited by these impudent little bipeds that dare challenge us. We headed straight to that planet and got ready to take it. We came in very close and saw that many of their ships were actually trying to leave the planet. We lined up our cannons and fired into them with our energy weapons. Many of their ships simply melted or split in half. Others ended up being damaged and had to crash land on their planet. This brought us a sense of joy as we realized they could not stand against us. Reading only approximately 3 million left on the planet, we decided to land our own forces. The transport ships went down and disembarked just outside of their major city. It was a surprise to hear that it was a very large agricultural area just outside the city. This brought us much delight, as we knew the agricultural planets made excellent tributes, and we would take this planet as their very first tribute to ours, our greatness. And suddenly we found that those bipeds were not as helpless as we thought. Suddenly, many cracks of sound entered the atmosphere, and many of our soldiers began to drop. Something flew at us at something around the speed of sound and would smack into our soldiers as they ran for cover. We didn't know what it was, but our soldiers then charged towards the city. Any of these bipeds they immediately fired their plasma-based weapons into, and each of these bipeds that was hit would scream out in pain, but it would take more than one hit to take them down. Seeing the first strike, even if it was directly in the center of these bipeds, it would burn them. The smell was abhorrent, and that biped, this human, would scream in pain for a moment and then raise its weapon up again. We found that they were some sort of primitive projectile weapons. Primitive as they may be, they still worked. Many of their projectiles began to pierce through even our chitinous allies as they began to fall one by one. This enraged us. How dare they fight against us? The order came down to take them all apart, even if it's hand-to-hand combat. As our own people entered the city, these bipeds, those that were not armed, would jump at our people and grab them, and to our absolute shock, something that barely stood 60% of our height was able to grab one of ours, lift it out of the ground or off the ground with one hand, reach with its other arm, and rip an appendage clean off our soldiers. And then, laughing, it would use that appendage to beat the same one of our warriors to death. It was absolutely stunning. But this fear brought much anger with it, as our soldiers began to blast out at anything that moved. It didn't matter if it was half-formed, if it was a larvae, we didn't care. They all will die today. To our absolute shock, we thought we had knocked the fight out of them after the first 48 hours. Then one of our groups came across an area. The sign said Elementary Skao. Inside, many of their larvae were holed up, protected by a few of their females. They were hiding in the basement area, and our soldiers decided to show the humans. This is what happens when you go against us, when you defy us. They sent out the signal to show all their larvae, all their females being blasted 5, 6, 7, a dozen times, screaming in agony and pain as their internal organs began to cook inside their bodies, and eventually they broke. Taking this planet was difficult. Surprisingly, with only 3 million inhabitants, we wager only about maybe 500,000 actually fought. But our losses were surprisingly high. Approximately 8% of the entire invading force was completely lost. Another 16% were damaged. However, with a little bit of healing time, they would be back. As we consolidated our forces and began to take stock of what the planet had to offer us, we sent the message along with a video of us taking out their larvae. This is what happens when you defy us. Surrender, or this will be the fate of your entire race. It took less than a solar rotation for them to respond. Their message was confusing at most, as we did not understand why they said that we had mated toward the sky. We played it back, and it simply said, "Now we're really gonna fuck you up."